I stayed in Nepal for 10 days as a school trip, and the culture there was so different that it gave me many life lessons that I will hold true for the rest of my life. Coming from England, the reserved culture, some would argue little culture at all, was vastly, significantly different to Nepal. And I have never been to a country out of the UK other than Greece, so this was an experience. When coming to Nepal, the first day, I was greeted with many products that reflected its culture, like singing bowls, beads, necklaces, all things and everything that represent Hinduism, the food, the music of Nepal. Even instruments were a popular market in the streets of Nepal. On day two, I visited more of the religious context of Nepal, specifically the temples. There was one called Pashupatinath, in which we did see cremations that were done very differently to what one may see in Christianity or Judaism. What we saw was bodies being cremated at a river, as the culture there believes that reincarnation can only be ended if their body is disposed into a river, specifically the river Ganges, as that is the holiest. So day two was many temples, exploration of the religious culture. Our second temple was Swahabanath. Swahabanath was inhabited by monkeys, and I found that so fascinating because I've never seen urban monkeys before. It's just so cool. And one of the people on our trip got scratched by one. She ended up being fine completely, but it's very interesting how monkeys could just live among us and feel entitled to attack people, obviously for reasons such as stealing, so they could sell off a phone or a bottle of water and get a banana for it. Swahabanath was a great highlight because of its massive views that spanned for miles across the city of Kathmandu, and it made me realize how big the city was and how cool society is for building such an enormous civilization, even in such a poorer country such as Nepal. And now I'm finally going to get to my point. My point being that one of the lessons that this Nepal trip taught me, after visiting the city, the temples, teaching at a school called Shubhakamana Academy, going on a safari, visiting more temples, and finally going shopping on the last day. My first lesson I learned was that growth 100% requires you to be open to new experiences. In life, the only way our brain, our neural connections, become stronger and become more numerous is to have these new experiences. And by new experiences, I mean anything at all, anything that's new. For example, a few days ago I tried a kiwi, which was separate to this trip. And I haven't had a kiwi in many years, and I always believed that kiwis, for some reason, tasted vile. The last time I had them was when I was probably a toddler, and now I like kiwis. It's that simple. It's that simple. Now, any opportunity I get to have a kiwi, I will likely have a kiwi. A better example of this is, of course, on the trip. So on the trip, there were many opportunities to have new experiences. Every student that signed up for this trip had to teach. Chosen ones that were optional that I chose to make. I did a speech at the end, along with 3 other people. And that was a big highlight for me because I didn't need to say much. It was 10 seconds of words. It wasn't anything particularly hard, but it required confidence. It required thought. There wasn't going to be a point speaking if I didn't have a point. And so my point was that I connected to people. And I expressed that through my words. And I didn't need much time to do it. And that was a new experience, because that taught me that you can communicate so much with so little. You can grab people's attention if you use and you speak from your heart. Being open to new experiences can be so small. It doesn't have to be something like doing a speech. Being open to new experiences can mean talking to a stranger, and some may argue that's a massive thing. Being open to new experiences could mean eating food of a different culture, such as Nepal's famous momos. And of course, momos are not only exclusive to Nepal. They're famous in India and other surrounding East Asian countries, but Nepal has its variation, and many of us in the West probably haven't tried momos, and I did, along with many other people in my group, and I wouldn't say they're the best, but I tried them anyway, and I liked them. And what that has done is, that's created a memory for me that I will never forget, even if it's not entirely a significant one. What momos taste like, what a kiwi tastes like, what doing a speech feels like. Another example of a new experience, being open to one, is the home visit. One thing that wasn't on our itinerary. So the home visits were optional during the same time as the teaching project, where we taught conversational English. And what we found was that many students at this school had incredibly simple lives. And that's not to say in a bad light. Every home visit I saw, they didn't have their own private transport. They needed a bus or some sort of public transport. Many of them lived without one or both parents, unfortunately having lost them at some point in their lives. And all of them did not live to the same standards we do. I remember one lived in a bungalow with his mum and dad, and the dad was a painter and he could not work because nobody would buy his work. Nobody would buy his paintings. An artiste, I would say, rather than a painter. Now, the fact that this was optional, the fact that this was a choice, made it much more meaningful to complete it, to do it. Because there's now this path I imagine where I didn't take it. So when you have a choice and you decide to take that new experience, you now can look back, because the other path you could have taken was a path where you stayed the same. You carried on as you always did. And there's no growth there. I mean, this is proven by time perception. As humans, our time perception generally is quite fast. If we're doing the exact same thing every day, every week, every hour, every year. But if we do something different nearly every minute of the day, it will feel like a month compared to the fact that it actually is a week. And that's how Nepal felt, because we were in a different environment. We were doing different things. We were challenging ourselves. We were trying out new foods. Obviously, they're small things. We were teaching children, which is one of the most daunting things we did. And we connected to each other. Connecting to people will always be a new experience, because everyone is different. Everyone. A social person, an extrovert, generally always has a new experience when talking to a stranger, just like an introvert. If they don't know the person, it's exciting and meaningful, because you get to connect to someone you never have connected to. You don't know what's in store for the future. You've no idea. And that's an example of a new experience. My second lesson that I learned after 10 days in Nepal is that challenges force people to connect to each other on an emotional level, on a deep mental and emotional level. And it's quite obvious why, It's common knowledge that people who get stuck in survival situations and have to figure out how to stay alive end up becoming the best of friends. There's stories like this. But this is less obvious. This was not survival. But in fact, it was a sort of different type of survival. It's survival of identity, survival of the mind. And challenges are hard because they force us to change. And change is painful because a part of you has to die to become a new, true version. The point is that when taking on challenges, particularly alongside people, you begin to work together, even on a subconscious level, to figure out how to grow. And in that process, you learn about each other and you learn how special and different we all are as human beings. And I think that's the most natural way to get close to people, is by taking on challenges together. Now, none of us, in my opinion, were particularly close before Shubhakamana Academy and the teaching project, or at least I wasn't. After that, though, I became close friends with nearly every single person in our group. And looking back, I wouldn't say there were any particularly significant moments during the teaching project. But afterwards there was, and that, I believe, is why it's a subconscious thing. Taking on challenges allows you to connect people without even having to think about it. We do things to help each other without actually consciously being aware. Not many people can say they have taught people, and not many people can say that they can or will teach someone today or tomorrow. And many of us didn't, but we did it. We did it anyway. We got on with it. Some of us taught martial arts. Some of us taught earthquakes. Some of us taught climate change. Some of us taught football. But all of us taught conversational English. All of us taught how to communicate. All of us taught how to connect. And that was the beauty of that project. How to be connected to people halfway across the world that we had never spoke to prior. And many of us have made connections with those peoples as well. Taking on challenges connects us also because we get to talk about them. A big theme of this trip was the journal meetings. And the journal meetings allowed us to talk about different concepts that many people don't usually talk about, like setting goals. What does that mean? How do we achieve it? How does each individual person generally actually do that? Wisdom. What does wisdom mean? What does friendship mean? What does talent mean? How does that differ from passion? Or how does that differ from being gifted? So many of these things we discussed in a circle. And we got to see each other's ideas, and we challenged each other. And challenging each other allowed us to see different perspectives. Seeing different perspectives opened up our minds and allowed us to see each other on a deeper emotional level. It's that simple. That in itself was a challenge, putting ourselves out there, putting out our deeper emotional ideas, putting out our deeper meanings, and seeing and risking whether they were right or not. My final lesson I learned from Nepal is that people's definitions of happiness differ greatly all across the world. Now, this is arguable, but many people in the West believe that happiness is determined by money, maybe fame, but in the big scheme of things, identity, and how big your identity is and how influential you are, because that's what money and fame, their deeper meanings, signify. So after teaching at Shubhakamana, after doing the home visits, after exploring the city, seeing stray dogs, seeing general poverty nearly everywhere, I saw that happiness in Nepal wasn't defined by money or fame, but defined by family, love, and culture. Compared to England, which is particularly reserved, Nepal was an explosion of culture. Everyone's friendly. You talk to... In fact, you don't need to talk to someone on the street. Someone on the street will talk to you. Whether that's to sell something or to make conversation, because a tourist coming to their country appears to be the coolest thing ever. And they quite love tourism, being a landlocked country. And I think that I have seen that every resident of Nepal just wants to live and just wants to have a living, and that's enough meaning to provide happiness. And it's also taught me that my definition of happiness is not just entirely, it's definitely not correct, but it's not solid. I don't have a solid idea of happiness, and maybe no one does, but those people who don't overcomplicate it are usually the happiest. And I realise that's created a paradox, but they appear the happiest. They generally appear happy, from my definition, simply by not overcomplicating what their desires in life are. The people of Nepal love their own culture, something many of us don't dare to do. To summarise, my 3 lessons after spending 10 days in Nepal are to be open to new experiences. Always make sure to try out new things, because you will never fathom how many new experiences there are in the world that one lifetime can ever even achieve, and how many people on their deathbeds will regret not taking as many new experiences as they could have done. My second point is that challenges do force people to connect to each other. Having these new experiences, which links in with people, particularly strangers, forces you to talk about it, forces you to experience it together, and forces you to create a bond, because you realize you're not the only one, and that every individual has their own story. Once you do begin discussing these failures or successes. Finally, happiness is subjective. Seeing students at Shubhakamana Academy, their eagerness to learn, how they live at home, seeing independent shops, how their stores thrive, how happy they are just to sell one product, how eager and less reserved Nepali culture is to just talk to people, shows that happiness can differ everywhere. The Nepali people are very welcoming, and in the future I will 100% be looking to return.